Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today, I'm just going to read the headline. Earth's ancient life forms are awakening after 40,000 years in permafrost. And we're just not talking about microbes or bacteria here. They're totally formed multicellular life. And this has been long speculated for a long time about like whether stuff that's trapped in permafrost, just because of how well it's preserved, that perhaps there are organisms out there that survive and end up repopulating the Earth after crazy cataclysmic events or ice ages and whatnot. So let's just explore this because it's super, super fascinating, and it opens up the imagination to all sorts of possibilities. And it this is like one of those articles where it's like all bets are off. In my mind, just because, again, all the possibilities, and I'll talk about some of the larger questions after this. But this picture here is a sample of the reawakened, quote, reawakened moss that was found in the permafrost. The article opens off about the Little Ice Age, which happened throughout between 1550 and 1850, this period of 300 years, this global cold snap. And that's basically a period when the glaciers were expanding throughout the Arctic. Teardrop is one of these. And then since 1850, there are these plants that were frozen under this slab of ice. So for 300 years, this plant is trapped under this ice here. And then Catherine Lafarge, she's an evolutionary biologist. She comes to the melting edge of the teardrop, and then she finds this moss here. It was faded and torn, but it was still kind of green, so it might have something there. So she takes it back to the lab, and this has been one in many examples of researchers searching this Arctic area and discovering these frozen organisms, presumed dead for thousands of years, and then they're coming back to life. And again, it's not just bacteria, although it does include simple bacteria, but it also includes multicellular animals as well. And back in 2009, they were scouring the teardrops at this transitionary area where all of the glaciers were melting, and they're collecting blackened plant matter spit out by the shrinking glacier. Their goal was to document the vegetation that long ago formed the base of the island's ecosystem. Now, if they're able to document exactly what was growing 30,000 years ago, 35,000 years ago, then they could paint a better picture of what was living on the island. So this doesn't seem like much, it's just moss, whatever. But if there's a lot of moss, then there are going to be organisms coming to feed on that moss, and then from there those organisms bear other organisms that come, and then next thing you know, you have this fully functioning ecosystem on this island. So this is but a stepping stone to further knowledge about the remote past, essentially. And this is what she says. Lafarge says, the material had always been considered dead, but by seeing green tissue, I thought, well, that's pretty unusual. So she took a flyer and decided to do some research. She collected dozens of these samples back to Edmonton in Canada, and she started literally cultivating them. She put them in nutrient-rich soils in a warm laboratory, and then a third of them burst forth with new shoots and leaves. So that's a turning point. That's a moment. It's like, wow. Okay, this stuff can lie dormant for a long time. So, and also there are few ill effects of its multi-centennial deep freeze. So, meaning it wasn't damaged very, very much through the millennia of being trapped under this ice. So, again, they decided to look into what was going on. What was the plant? Was it just simply being frozen, or were those conditions of being trapped under the ice triggering another survival mode, so to speak, to preserve the plant and to weather the storm, so to speak, until one day the time will come where the glaciers recede, and then the moss can begin anew or resume its life from that point on. And again, because normally jagged ice crystals shred cell membranes and other biological machinery, so many plants and animals just simply die. But because it didn't happen to the moss, they're thinking that it got sent into some sort of survival mode, whether it clammed up or whatever it was, whatever biological process that shot into action, it kept it from the membranes being destroyed. So it's a very interesting, I guess, ability that they had no idea these mosses had. They desiccate when the temperatures plummet, sidestepping the potential hazard of ice forming in their tissues. And if parts of the plant do sustain damage, certain cells can divide and differentiate into all the various tissue types that comprise a complete moss, just like stem cells in human embryos. So again, this idea of this versatility in their at the cellular level can keep them alive for thousands and thousands of years. So if scientists can master or understand completely this process, then the next logical step is to parlay that into some sort of either medicine or something that could benefit humans on the whole. Granted, I don't want to live forever, and I'm not like a transhumanist type of person, but I'm just saying that it's discoveries like these that end up turning into something bigger and more exaggerated, more elaborated, and controlled. Because humans tend to do that. We tend to discover things and then try to use them to our benefit. Thanks to these adaptations, mosses are more likely than other plants to survive long-term freezing. And then after that revival, so to speak, they'd awaken a 1,500-year-old moss buried more than 3 feet underground in the Antarctic permafrost. And so they came to the conclusion that the permafrost environment is very stable. Perennially frozen soil can insulate the moss from surface level stresses such as annual freeze-thaw cycles or DNA damaging radiation, and that's another thing. The DNA was not damaged at all. So the best way to describe it is it's just lying dormant. And a lot of people think that plagues and viruses are like that as well. There are certain harmful bacteria and strains of viruses and I guess these plagues that are lying dormant somewhere only to be reawakened later in a different context. So again, this idea is not really new, but there's just never been any smoking gun evidence in the past. The regrowth of centuries-old mosses suggests that glaciers and permafrost are not merely graveyards for multicellular life, but they could instead help organisms withstand ice ages. So that's always been a question that I've got is if ice ages are so cyclical, then how come there's still life around now? Why didn't they just all get wiped out? Well, it's because organisms are biologically or evolutionarily equipped to adapt to those ice ages, because those ice ages are part of their physical adaptation as well. It's not just sexual adaptation. It's not just survival of the fittest amongst other competitors. It's also the environment as well. And you can see that built into some of these mosses. As human-caused warming peels away ice cover in the Arctic and Antarctic, whoever makes it out of the ice alive is poised to dominate the budding polar ecosystems. Convey explains that as melting ice exposes land surfaces, plants generally colonize a new terrain from somewhere else via spores carried long distances by the wind. Such far-flung dispersal is low, often taking decades. So that's one other way plants colonize new terrain. And this is the other way. So when something like moss can survive in one spot for a long period of time, and then that accelerates the recolonization process. Like I said, these mosses paint a lifeless landscape green almost overnight, paving the way for other organisms to arrive and establish. And then that's what I was talking about earlier about the development of ecosystems and such. And you can tell what kind of animals would live based on the vegetation that's around the area. And then you can tell what other animals would live based on those animals who first arrived to feed off that moss. And then there you go, it just keeps going and going like that. The elderly mosses discovered by Lafarge and Convey are remarkable. The clique of Ice Age survivors extends well beyond this one group of plants. So there's another animal, multicellular animal that has survived as well. So ancient microbes long enough to make the extreme field routine. A microbiologist from the University of Tennessee, I'm not going to say her last name, Vishnevitskaya, drills deep into the Siberian permafrost to map the web of single-celled organisms that flourished ice ages ago. And then she's found million-year-old bacteria, and then she's brought them back to life on the petri dish. And then she found something which has a brain and nervous system, and it's a long segmented worm. So it had a head on one end and an anus on the other. It's the classic nematode, and that was living in the permafrost, and it came back to life. And that was about 41,000 years old. So it's very interesting. It's the oldest living animal ever discovered, and to still be alive. Yeah, right. Oldest living. Redundancy is redundant, right? This very worm dwelled in the soil beneath Neanderthals' feet, and then survived long until today, where we are today. So again, these nematodes are ubiquitous across Earth's diverse habitats. They can survive with scant oxygen and scalding heat. The nematode species can hunker down into a state of suspended animation called the dour stage. So this is their version, the nematode version of surviving under harsh conditions and just waiting, just biding its time until the opportunity comes where it's safe to go back to being active and resuming their life. So it's very interesting. And Dauer means duration in German, in which they forestall feeding and grow a protective coating that shields them from extreme conditions. She speculated that nematodes could theoretically survive indefinitely. That's very interesting. If you guys think about this, made me think about Kali Yuga. So Kali Yuga in the Vedas is this period of I think it's 2.5 million years, some crazy amount of time. I don't know. It's either 1 million or 2.5 million. I forget. Maybe 800,000. But it's a long period. So apparently Kali Yuga is a time where there's a lot of instability. So it just made me think a nematode's ability to clam up and just wait it out made me think of Kali Yuga. So maybe there's that something like a nematode could theoretically live millions of years and experience the whole gamut of the Earth cycle. So that's very, very interesting to me. And maybe the ancients knew something about that as well. He views nematodes' virtuosic endurance in a cosmic context. It's very good news for the solar system, said Borgoni, who believes these feats of survival may portend life on other planets. So he thinks that, if nematodes have this ability to essentially live in a vacuum, then perhaps something like panspermia or living life, interplanetary life, so to speak, is possible in the physical sense. So I don't know if that's true or not, but he thinks it's a clue in that direction. And it seems like a very godlike ability, this very godlike adaptation where you can survive anything that the cosmos throws at you. It's very, very fascinating stuff. It is ecological gospel that some creatures survive by migrating vast and hazardous distances to find favorable habitat. More recent discoveries hint at a different migratory mode through time. So this is another approach to getting to another place, so to speak. They're just, instead of flying and migrating to the other spot and with all the risks that come with that transportation, instead the other approach that biological life recognized and took was, hey, let's just wait here and survive here, and then we'll let instead of us going to the ideal conditions, we'll let the ideal conditions come to us through time, without having to move. So they just wait till everything else rearranges around them. That's very, very fascinating. And it flies in the face of normal Darwinian survival of the fittest, which is you got to get out there and spread your genes before it's too late. And in order to do that, you've got to meet all other types of requisites, and there's no way to evolve other than that. Well, it seems like nematodes have already found the ultimate way of surviving, and that's just hunkering down. That's very interesting stuff. So some of the larger questions I was thinking was, maybe humans have some sort of ability like this. Maybe not physically. Obviously, if we get trapped under a glacier, we're toast. We're gonna freeze, and it's over for us. But maybe we have some sort of more abstract. It maybe within our minds we can build something because we have the ability to create. We have this gift of creativity. We have gift of abstract thought. We have all of these things going for us. Perhaps we have it within us to build something that replicates this ability. Kind of like in those sci-fi movies. What was that movie with Matthew McConaughey where they're going to? I really can't remember the movie, but they lay down in the chamber. And then Matt Damon was in the chamber, and he got out, and then he like betrayed them. I forget the name of the. Tell me in the comments, please. But anyway, maybe something like that has the same effect essentially, where you're preserving your body, but you're lying dormant. You're in this deep sleep, and then once conditions are fine, the thing opens up, and then you can come out. Still, however old you were when you went in, and then you just resume. It's almost like putting your life on pause and waiting for the shit to blow over, and then you can come back out. And this has been talked about for years. So maybe perhaps this biblical ability made it into the Bible and just was construed as just some godlike presence, some godlike God-given ability, or God itself, or himself rather. So again, I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about this ability. I just thought it was really interesting to talk about, and it's kind of a change of pace from what we were talking about before. We were talking about just a lot of about humans and about cultures and artifacts and stuff. This was a really pleasure. It was a pleasure to read, and it was a pleasure to come across this, and it was a pleasure to share it with you guys. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Share, like, and subscribe if you haven't already. My channel's really kicking off, and I'm pleasantly surprised that there are so many people who are interested in stuff like this. So again, leave a comment, and I'll talk to you guys later.